Welcome to Aspects of Writing. I'm your host, James Kelly, and my panelist for today is Janet Coursey. Our guests are Renee Jean and Judy Shine Logan. And the topic of the show is, what does an author look like? Our first guest is, and then Janet, I'm going to let you introduce her, Judy Shine Logan.
Judy Shine Logan. Judy and I are kind of old friends at this point in time. She wrote a book, I wrote a book, and some of our people even crossed paths, but we didn't even know each other when we wrote the books. Please tell us a little bit about your background and what you're doing now.
Thank you, Jen. And you're absolutely right. We have the great minds that are following the same track, and we both care about women's rights and safety and advocacy. Yeah. I wrote my first book about juxtaposing a recently widowed woman and a young battered wife and mother. I wanted to look at the differences between young and old, a good love and a bad love, and whether or not they could come somewhere in the middle and assist each other to go forward. I'm working on the sequel, and I actually have a website that's in construction.
Okay.
JudyShineLogan.com.
Marvelous.
Well, I know your website's there because I've seen it. So.
Do you have any plans for future books?
I'm writing a second book, the sequel to the first one. And I've been doing a lot more short stories. I don't know why that seems to be the genre for me right now. And I'm going to put them into an anthology.
Okay.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, I'll self-publish that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So actually, one of my stories got chosen by the Sun City Art Club to be painted.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very bizarre story called Burnt Toast, and the painting is equally bizarre.
Where can we learn more about your books?
At JudyShineLogan.com.
Well, Judy, I'd like to know what inspired you to write your first book.
Well, twofold. My grandmother, who raised 7 children on her knees, literally, she lost her husband at 42, and she was Roman Catholic, so she would go to Mass every morning after scrubbing floors on her knees all night.
Wow.
And she put all 7 children either through college if they were boys, or secretarial school or nursing for the 2 girls. The other thing was I worked in the Department of Psychiatry for a local community hospital. And I saw these women and children coming in, and they were brutalized. And I thought, why does somebody say they love them and then beat the hell out of them?
Yeah.
So I just didn't have a way to reconcile the two. So I decided to write it out and see what would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is that first book about? Shelter Me. What is it about?
It's about a battered woman who becomes the recently widowed executive's wife's work supervisor. And it's not until the battered wife and her children are expelled from their home after a violent incident that the widow even recognizes that her supervisor is a battered woman, and the battered woman has nowhere to go, literally.
Yeah.
From the ER where her daughter is treated for an injury, she has nowhere to go, and she happens to remember the widow's phone number, and she calls her, and the widow takes them in.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's not a smooth transition by any means.
Yeah.
The widow is angry. We were always angry when we first lose our loved ones, and she's in the grieving process, and she's pretty prickly even at the beginning of her job, which is kind of strange because she needs the job.
Yeah.
But the grief process is just that.
Now, your book is fictional, but it's based loosely on...
On my grandmother, as I say, she's the widow in the book. She never dated after her husband died. She was 38. She died at 86, pining to see her husband again.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh, what a good love. And then, of course, the women and children. When I came out here to Nevada, which I used to call Nevada.
Shame on you.
Yeah, my Boston accent. I volunteered at Safe Nest, and I could only take that for about a year. That was too up close and personal because I actually worked at the shelter, and it was tough.
You know, you said Nevada. In Missouri, there's a city called Nevada.
Oh.
It's spelled the same way as Nevada, but they call it Nevada.
Nevada.
All right.
Heavens.
Our next guest is Renee Jean. And Renee, please tell us about who you are, what you do, and what inspired you to become an author.
Well, I've been writing most of my life, actually. I remember reading poems back in school, writing in creative writing classes, kind of purposely not taking the suggested courses just so I could take more writing classes. And I did self-publish many years ago before it was even remotely popular. When I was in high school, my sophomore year, I believe. I was 16. It was a collection of short stories and poems with some other students in my class. And seeing other people reading my stories and asking me questions and realizing that those pictures in my head were translating for other people was something that pushed me to keep going. And I took a break. I went through an incident in high school that I didn't realize it at the time would become very inspirational to me. And it became one of the books that I've recently published called Survivor, which is based on true story fighting back against domestic violence.
Okay. So what is your most recent book?
The one that I'm working on right now that I'm writing is actually called Sharing Strength, and it's, I guess, mostly a drama about a survivors group, a support group for people with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And then the novellas, including Survivor, are all the background stories of the characters from Sharing Strength. So I'm simultaneously writing the novellas while the novel.
How many books have you written?
I have 9 books written,
9?
but only 4 of them are currently published. The rest are in editing.
So you just shared with us you do have future books, the one you're working on now, and then the novella series.
The Sharing Strength series has 5. I also have a 4-book thriller series, and then I have several just traditional, I guess, fiction dramas.
Okay. All right. So where can we learn about Renee Jean?
I have an author Facebook page, Renee Jean 88. I also have Writing Forces, which is my website, writingforces.com.
Okay. All right. So we're going to go into a group discussion. And again, our topic for today is what does an author look like? The reason we're doing this is because so many times people think that we all have when you're reading a book, we automatically think of the person that we see on TV, and we really don't have any concept of who that person is. And oftentimes, if we haven't seen that person, we try to imagine what that person looks like in our mind. And the reality is we're all everyday people. Yep. We're just everyday people.
Absolutely.
And really, there's a story in all of us, and that's kind of what this show is about. Most authors are judged by their appearance, and that can include the book cover, for example, the way they wrote it, the bio, and even the website that you have your book listed on. There are many different types of authors: novelists, poets, journalists, screenwriters, playwrights, copywriters, and so on. There are also many genres of writing: academic, creative, business, professional, and journalistic. Basically speaking, for as many different types of books and publishers writings there are in the world, there are as many different types of authors that write them. And here's an insight of a few famous writers and their past before they became an author. And Jan, I'm going to let you start with the first one.
I love this. John Steinbeck ran a fish hatchery in Lake Tahoe. He also gave guided tours of the place, during one of which he met his first wife, Carol Henning.
Yeah,
who knew?
I know. And Judy?
John D'Agata? Yeah, D'Agata worked in a condom shop. To be clear, not a sex shop, just a condom shop that also sold a few cheesy sex gags, delivered balloons as a clown, bar-backed, and served bagels.
Well, that's probably something
an
you would look at an author, and say, I would never have guessed that.
That would make a book.
Right, Renee.
After dropping out of Ole Miss after 3 semesters, William Faulkner served as the university's postmaster for 3 years.
Wow, okay.
Gee.
Yeah, see, who would have known. And after leaving Dartmouth, he only attended 2 months. Robert Frost returned to Massachusetts, where he worked as a newspaper boy and did some time in a factory changing light bulbs.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Who would have thought? William
Yeah.
Faulkner. Or Robert Frost.
We're still on Faulkner.
I know, I am. Yeah, Jan?
Ever the rebel. Jack London was an oyster pirate, stealing oysters from the beds of large farmers and selling them at the Oakland markets. He also did a little gold prospecting and may or may not have spent time as a hobo. I'll bet he did.
I'm sure. Yeah. And Renee?
Throughout his life, author William Carlos Williams managed to maintain a successful medical practice as well as a full literary career.
All right. And Judy, this one I found interesting.
Yeah, Stephen King was a janitor in a high school before his work was published. Good thing, too, because that's where he got his inspiration for the opening scene of Carrie.
And I remember that scene so vividly, too.
Yeah.
All right.
Scary.
And William S. Burroughs was an exterminator in Chicago. And what's interesting is Harper Lee was a reservations clerk at Eastern Airlines for 8 years until a friend gave her a Christmas gift of a year's wages with the condition that she would use it to write. She finished the first draft of To Kill a Mockingbird that year.
That's impressive.
Wow.
Do we know who the friend was?
No, but isn't that amazing?
That
That may
is
never have
amazing.
happened if
Right.
that friend hadn't given her that gift.
That's awesome.
Which
Yeah.
just goes to show you how much money you make working at Eastern Airlines
Well, back then, I'm sure.
back
yeah.
100 years ago.
That was a wonderful gift.
Yeah.
All right, I believe everyone gets the idea of what we're getting at here.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. We all come from different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And sitting at this table, we're very diverse.
Absolutely.
All right. So, what does it take to pursue a career as an author? And we can talk about that before we even go into this next section. So, what does it take to pursue a career as an author? I mean, when I started out, I didn't think of myself as having a career as an author because I really don't yet.
Yeah.
But really, I don't think I didn't go about it that way. Because I never looked at the financial end of it, like how much money am I going to make. I actually went about it because I love creating, and I had been creating since now I'm really dating myself. Since 1980, I wrote my first book. Well, actually, it was a script. It was a television. It was a movie that was turned into television scripts. So I've been creative all along. And then it wasn't until 1990 when I wrote a book called The Emblem, which was actually first a script that I transposed into novel format. And 95, I published that book, that I started taking my writing seriously. And I think the reason is oftentimes we're afraid as authors, like how well will we be received? Because let's face it, we all hate critics, and everyone's a critic.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're our own worst critic.
Yeah, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So for me, it was nothing I set out to do. It was kind of a hobby that's now turned into something else, including this radio show.
Mm-hmm.
So what about for you, Renee?
Creation and being able to express yourself has always been important to me. I started dancing ballet when I was 3 years old, and I actually had intended to go into patisserie and baking. I love to create chocolate candies and different cakes, and that was actually going to be my career, but the voices in my head wouldn't stop talking. So
Are they still talking?
all the time.
Obviously.
Right now?
All the time.
Obviously.
So I would write as a hobby whenever I couldn't focus on any of the candies and that kind of stuff, if I was having a block on coming up with a new flavor, and it just kind of started taking over, and I started writing more than I was baking.
Okay. And what about for you, Judy?
I always like to tell the joke that I've been writing so long, I probably signed my own birth certificate. But writing was never a focus in and of itself. Like you say, James, I never took it seriously, and it took my family literally dragging me and screaming, saying, no, I don't want to put it out there. They're going to hate it. It's going to be awful. And they're like, are you stupid? Just put it out there. And it took forever to get me to recognize that I have been given a gift and that I've worked hard to hone it because it's craft as much as art. And this is the result now. I'm retired and I can do it full time.
Yeah. What about for you, Jan?
Well, I never meant to write a book. I meant to write a nasty letter to somebody running for Congress. And it occurred to me that it would be 86 the moment it would arrive.
Yeah.
So the only way for me to get my point out was to write a book that other people might read, that they then would turn around and say to her, you're nuts. So, yeah, that's how it worked out for me.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting how we all got started. And it is important to understand, too, that along the way, at least for me, you're always going to have the naysayers who are going to say, you don't have the background for this. Why are you even trying to do this? Or someone may read it for the first time, because the first draft is always going to be very rough, especially if English isn't in your background or journalism isn't in your background, as in my case. So, I had someone who told me, you'll never make it as a writer. And, I always say never give up. Don't let anyone discourage you. I had people who critiqued that first book, and I'll never forget this one person. And they were face-to-face critiquing it for me. And they had done a written, and then we were going over it. And they had the names wrong. And I'm thinking, you didn't read this very well because you've got the name wrong, you've got the location wrong. But they just wanted to have something negative to say to make it feel like they critiqued your book.
Yeah.
And that's the thing you have to look at. when you're writing, you have to understand there are going to be people out there who are going to critique what you wrote and give you negative feedback. Sometimes it's because of envy, because maybe they can't do that themselves. I had a friend, and I've talked about it before, who had a PhD and 2 master degrees, who could not write a book. And English was his specialty, but it's because you can't just have the ability to write. You have to have the creative mind in order to make it work. They have to come together. I use that word.
Good.
In order for it to work. You can't have one or the other. You have to have both. You have to be creative, and you have to have the ability to write. And what's interesting, as someone like myself who didn't have necessarily the educational background. I mean, I did go to college, but the point is I didn't have the journalistic background. You can learn as you go. I've learned so much about writing, having written several things now, because I'll take it to an editor. The editor will go through it. Then you have to go back over it, and then you have to rewrite it. And believe it or not, you really do learn a lot that way.
Yes.
So even if you start off as someone who may not have the background necessary for the writing aspect of it, you will learn. You will grasp sooner or later.
Well, you take that feedback, you take that advice that you're given from your editors, from your beta readers, from your friends, and you don't even realize it, but 2-3 books down the road, you're seeing it as you're writing it. Your
It's
first
automatic.
drafts are
Yeah.
even better than they used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Your first draft's probably better than the 5th or 6th draft of
that
the first book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, James, I want to add to what you said about if you don't necessarily have the quote-unquote education to write, but I went to college as an adult after my children were probably in grade school, and I took English as the path because I figured, well, I can become a teacher, and I won't be a secretary anymore, which is terrible money. I can become a teacher and have medium terrible money. And I took 4 years of college English, and one of the dearest professors, Emily Meyer, said to me, my last paper was not a thesis because it was for the master's degree, but she said you can either do a thesis or you can do a script. And I did a script comparing the 4 women we had studied: Eve, Daisy Buchanan, the wife of Bath, and Jamie from Their Eyes Were Watching God.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote it, and she gave me an A+. And she said, you wasted 4 years. You should have been in creative writing.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
Thanks a bunch.
Well, we had Gregory Compass on as well, and Gregory, he was in his 30s before he went back to school and got his degrees, and now he has
exactly.
several degrees.
Yeah.
Teaches English and teaches writing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you never know where you're going to be in life. There's so many authors, by the way, who start off late in life as well.
Absolutely.
And a point here too is Gregory will tell you he never writes a book and publishes it without it being edited by someone else.
Well, that's
Yes.
true.
Absolutely.
That
Yeah.
is true.
Absolutely.
And even though he's
Even
an
though-
editor, he
yeah.
has helped
Yep.
edit
Right.
other
Yep.
people's books.
He's an expert.
And that's something I've always believed in anyway. I had the person who I told about had the PhD in English went ahead and had someone else edit his dissertation because we get too close to what we're doing and we're going to overlook things because we know what we wrote. So we're going to miss words like these left out or a or and you need that extra set of eyes who's looking specifically for something, at least
Absolutely.
proofreading.
Right.
Yes.
It's
Yes,
sort of
for
like
sure.
you raise your children and you idolize them, and then you meet them as adults and you go, I don't even like you.
Yeah. Yep.
So, everyone should be encouraged to write something. You don't even have to publish it. If you just want to write just for the glory of it, or maybe just write for the family, you can always print something up just for the family. There are people that I know have done that will just write the book and then just publish an edition for the family only. So,
Well, and you network, you meet people, you meet editors, you meet publishers. My degree's in marketing.
okay.
So once the book was published, I spent so long agonizing over the editing, over the cover, over everything else. But once that was done and it was time to go to book shows, I was in my element.
Yeah.
I know
right.
how to set up the table. I know how to network. I know how to talk to people. That's where I'm good.
Yes.
I can talk to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
But the actual formatting a book and coming up with the right cover and everything else. I just wanted to pull my hair out.
Yeah. But that's why we have people we can go out there and hire to do all that
Exactly.
as well.
And now I help other people when they're doing their book launches and things like that and planning events because that's my element. That's
Right.
where I'm
And
in.
now it's second nature to you.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
one of the things we're talking about here is, what does an author look like? I mean, you work in a hotel
I do.
as a dealer. And Judy, you...
I'm retired, but I do teach English classes to aliens.
Okay. Oh, wait till my book comes out next
Those-
month.
Those who are not from Boston.
Oh, okay. And then Jan...
I work at a car dealership, and I'm in BDC.
Yeah. And here I am in radio, but I worked in the hotel industry for most of my life. I was a mailman for 10 years. So actually I was writing during all of those stages, literally.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I was working at a hotel when I was 21 when someone read I was watching a television show. This is how I got into writing. I was watching a soap opera. We were out of work. A hotel had closed here in Las Vegas at that time. And the person I was living with, we decided we would write. She loved the soap operas, and after 3 days of watching these, I said, "I hate these things. I don't know how you can watch this." After 3 days, I was hooked.
Yeah.
But I'm watching this, saying these are stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I can write as good as this. So that's exactly what we ended up doing. We wrote an outline for actually it was like a 2-hour movie called "It Snowed in Las Vegas," about the cocaine and bringing it in from Mexico and that kind of thing. So anyway, someone we worked with who, her brother, which we did not know, was a producer in Hollywood. But this person read it, and she said, I really like this. I think there's something to this. Do you mind if I send this to my brother? We had no idea who her brother was because she didn't even tell us. We just figured, if someone else wants to read it, that's fine. We didn't protect it or nothing because we were just doing it as a hobby.
Right.
So she sent it to her brother, who was Jay Summers, who was the producer, director, and writer of Green Acres.
Oh, my.
Uh-huh.
And he was in his 80s, I think, back then. And so then Jay looked at it, and he wrote her back and said, this is really interesting. Do you think that maybe you could create 13, I think back then you had to have 13 to submit it, 13 episodes that we could put with this, and we could use this as the pilot, and if you can create 13 episodes with it, maybe I can pitch this as a television series.
Mm.
So we still didn't take it seriously. We didn't know what to think. But we're having fun. So then we went back and created these episodes, and we submitted it back to him. And he did. He spent 6 months going to the studios pitching this, trying to get it made into a television series. But at that time, it was very similar to Hotel in the sense that was centered around the concierge, whereas in my story, it was centered around room service captain, because that's what I was. So you write what you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, back then they didn't like to duplicate shows because there was only 3 networks.
Right.
It's not like today, where you have hundreds or thousands. So anyway, that it got nixed. I never thought about my writing after that. I really never thought anything about it. But if you think about it, that's kind of impressive that you had a producer interested in what you did.
Right.
Absolutely.
Today, it's gold. And today, I would think, oh, my God, someone really liked what I did. Back then, it was just a hobby, so I didn't think about it. But I kept writing. I created all these other little stories. And then I had a dream in 1995, and I dreamt about someone who was in the Secret Service, went to the Middle East, and I wrote about it the next day. I actually outlined it out the whole entire night. I would get up and outline it. And that was my first book, The Emblem. So the first book that I published was based on a dream. And then I've just been writing ever since. Haven't published a whole lot, getting ready to have 2 books come out in May of this year, and then hopefully a few more down the road here. But I certainly have at least 26, 27 stories, almost ready to go.
You could rewrite that first one. And
Yeah.
put it in-
I'm going to update it.
And put it in outer space.
Well, no. The first one is a government espionage. The first
No,
book.
I'm
No,
talking
the-
about.
the
I'm talking about the
cocaine.
drugs.
The cocaine and
Oh,
Las Vegas,
you mean the very
Yeah.
first story?
Yeah.
Actually, that would still work well today in this,
Yeah.
the way we wrote it, in the sense that we actually explained how they brought it into the hotels, how they were actually cut the cocaine. It was already cut and packaged I'm giving people ideas now, but it was it was prepackaged in sweet and low packets, so that they could pass it along to the buyers without anyone ever knowing what it was. But it had to, it was a very intricate setup, and that involved people in the hotel who were in room service to deliver it, so that no one was suspicious as to what was going on. But what happened was one of the captains who was new caught on to the fact that all the sweet and low was being ordered through this one company, and it was disappearing so quickly, and who was delivering it and why, and that's how the whole thing unfolded. Yeah. So, and then from there, after that, 2-hour pilot, then it turned into where there was always these episodes with involved the captain in room service, because in room service, having worked in room service, you're privy to the entire hotel, or at least back then you were. So you knew everybody in the hotel, and you knew what was going on. But yeah, we created episodes that were true. I mean, we didn't have to make up a whole lot. I mean, they were fictional, but they were based on real characters. Like, we had we had one cocktail waitress who literally, a sheik from the Middle East, he gave her a huge tip, like a $10,000 tip, but we had it to where it turned into a romance, and he pursued her. I mean, we took real events. We had a jeweler who was actually shot in the head while on the phone calling into room service. So I mean, we can take real life and we can turn it into a story. You can elaborate it, but it's amazing how you can just take what we know in real life and turn it into anything.
There's inspiration everywhere.
Yeah. I just thought of a good ending for that series is the new captain that comes on. I thought of the Dixie Chicks, the song Earl's Gotta Die.
Yeah.
You want some sweetener for your coffee? have 2 or 3.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, we never know who we are or who's writing and what they're coming up with or where even the stories come from. But we do all have a story inside. So how does inspiration play into the psyche of an author? And this is really interesting. Believe it or not, some authors have psychological disorders or had psychological disorders, some of our famous authors, as they were writing. And Judy, I'm going to let you read the first one.
Okay, Mervyn Peake was never a well man and suffered mental and physical setbacks throughout his life. In the late 1950s, the failure of a play he wrote sent Peake into a steep decline. And while he worked on the 3rd novel in his Gourmandhaus series, Titus Alone, he was suffering from dementia due to a condition closely related to Parkinson's disease, making his mental decline quite pronounced.
Yeah, so it's interesting. And that's the thing. We don't know. We have one author that I know who suffers from Alzheimer's and started writing when she was diagnosed from Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So you're someone you consider an author that you admire. We really don't know anything about them.
No.
Right.
Sir Terry Pratchett actually passed away from Alzheimer's, and he wrote his 41-book Discworld series after his diagnosis.
Wow. All right. And I'm going to let you take the next one, Renee.
Zelda Fitzgerald is a tragic figure, a classic example of a person with high spirits secretly suffering from a severe mental disorder. When she was finally diagnosed with schizophrenia in the early 1930s, she spent time at a clinic where she experienced a rush of creativity and wrote Save Me the Waltz as part of her therapy. Her husband, F. Scott Fitzgerald, wasn't pleased with it because it covered much of the same semi-autobiographical material as a novel he was working on, which would eventually become Tender is the Night. And he forced Zelda to revise the book extensively before he would allow her to publish. The failure of the book and mean-spirited reaction from her husband left Zelda crushed. She didn't return to writing until after Scott's death, and was working on a book when she died tragically in a fire at her hospital.
Oh, that's really interesting in itself, because there again, that's real life in the sense that who would know this woman was going through all this, the mental anguish as well from her husband, F. Scott Fitzgerald.
Yeah.
Like, I'm doing this, you can't do that,
And obeying that, listening to that, and being influenced by that and shut down by that.
Right.
Yeah.
So many people are, the rise of an eyebrow can shut off an idea.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and that's the tragedy of writing as well, in that we do oftentimes want to listen. And I'm just like that. I mean, to be honest with you, I take criticism. I have in the past. I've taken criticism really hard. I've toughened up over the years where now I almost welcome it, because in listening to what other people have to say, maybe I'll go back and re-examine and think maybe they're right. Maybe I could have changed that, or maybe this would have worked better.
But that initial, everybody, that's your baby, you know, when you first
Yeah.
are told, well, you might want to revise this, you might want to rethink this part, or this character doesn't ring true. Your immediate reaction is, well, you're mean. You know,
Yeah,
you
and
want
you
to
know-
argue it, and it's hard.
And we've all written the greatest novel out there, so
Absolutely.
Right.
who's going to tell us that we're wrong?
As far as criticism, my daughter taught me the best lesson. She's my hero. She does quality management, and when people complain to her, she says in her head, take a number.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Jan, you want to read the next one?
Yes. By 1959, Ernest Hemingway was not the man he'd once been. Assigned by Life magazine to write a 1,000-word piece about bullfighting in Spain, he submitted a manuscript of 130,000 words and found himself unable to edit it down into something suitable for publication. Turning to his friend, A.E. Hotchner, for help, Hotchner reported that Hemingway was unusually hesitant, disorganized, and confused.
That's me.
That sounds like a writer. Let's see. Shortly afterward, the author became visibly depressed, remaining in bed for days on end, and in 1960 voluntarily entered the Mayo Clinic for electroconvulsive therapy. And a few months later, Hemingway killed himself, and 25 years after that, the novel-length version of the bullfighting story was published as The Dangerous Summer. I don't want to have to die for my books, but I will.
You know what's interesting is that you have to wonder if the electroconvulsive therapy had something to do with possibly his mental state.
That and
Instead of helping him.
that and the alcoholism, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But he was a tormented man.
Yes. Yeah.
And sometimes they're the most creative people. You know, the more tormented, sometimes the more
voices
creative.
get a little louder that way sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You like those voices in your head.
Yeah, yeah.
I keep them down, you know, I distract them with card dealing.
Okay, all right.
The physiological dynamics of that is very, very interesting. When we're stressed or we're unhappy, it literally cuts a furrow in our brain.
Okay.
And for the synapses, the little sparks that go across those ridges in the brain, they fall into the hole.
Ah.
And so people who are chemically dependent also have those ridges, and a lot of their synapses will fall into the hole. So it isn't until the chemicals, alcohol, drugs, other drugs, or electroconvulsive therapy, actually shoots those little electrodes higher, then they feel stable, then they feel fine. But they always produce most of their best work when they're in the pit.
But you know, there are so many people who have talked about they've written their best movie or their best book when they were high or drunk or whatever.
Right.
And I always found that interesting. Like, should I be doing drugs? Or
Well, it's funny. I don't drink. I mean, I have a slight addiction to coffee, but I have a poster in my office that says "Write drunk, edit sober," and my boyfriend laughs at me. He's like, "I've never even seen you have a glass of wine." I said, "It's just a theory."
yeah.
Well, you've obviously known Julia Cameron, who wrote The Artist's Way and Being in the World. She used to write her books with a big glass of scotch on the one side and an apple if she got hungry on the other.
Wow.
She finally sobered up and wrote better books. So I don't know whether it's good or not.
Yeah.
Well, you think about it. I mean, I don't do drugs or drink either one. But if you think about it, when the mind is inebriated or you know on a chemical, your mind is wandering.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you are seeing things, doing things that you would not do in a normal state. So you probably would be really creative at that point. This is not to encourage anyone to do that by any
not
means.
at all.
But I'm just saying.
I thought that was just called wandering Fremont Street at 11 o'clock at night.
That is another world.
That's
That's
true.
for sure. That is for sure.
Well, the one thing writers need to remember is that if you stop yourself from writing something that you want to say, even though you know your friends and family are going to say that was totally inappropriate, don't worry about them. It's the guy that lives on the other side of the country that's going to read your book that's going to go, wow, I really like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So don't write for your family and friends. Write for the guy that lives on the other side of the country.
Yeah, I write for me. I actually create the stories that I enjoy and that I would enjoy reading myself so that, you know, I'm satisfied when I'm done with that story and the way it went. And then hopefully someone else will like it as well. But I also visualize when I write a movie. I'm one of those who always writes it like it's a movie. You know, I always visualize the movie.
Oh yeah, the movie plays in your head, and you just pretty much transcribe what you see in your head down onto the page.
Yeah.
And it's always so rewarding when that one person finally says, "Hey, you know, I noticed this," and you're like, "That's what I saw in my head. That's so great."
Yes.
And you realize you had that connection.
We've often talked about this as well, about how it's really scary to be a writer, and I think people don't understand that as writers sometimes we fear what we write. And, you know, I've talked about a scene I wrote in The Emblem, the first book that I published, and in that book there was a scene where the secretary was being scoped out by someone who was a bad guy. And basically he thought she had information that he needed leading to this emblem, which is what the book's about, or a medallion. And he goes there with the intent of killing her. He never intended to leave without killing her. She has no idea that's what he's going to do. So when she thinks he's leaving, he slams the front door. Then she realizes, this is turning bad. And he toys with her and makes her think he's going to rape her. But he has no intentions of doing that either. He just wants to, it's like a cat playing with a mouse.
Yep.
And then he eventually gets her to where he gets her in the bathroom, makes her disrobe, and then she still thinks he's going to do something, but he's not. And then that's when he murders her. But the thing is that was very difficult to write that scene. And then as an author, psychologically, you wonder, what are people going to think about me? And where did this idea come from? Because it's not me.
Right.
But the thing is I had to put myself in the place of this character, because he was bad throughout the whole book. And what would he do? And he was one of those who would toy with people. It wasn't enough that he knew he was going to get rid of her anyway. He wanted to taunt her. It was his way of, I guess, getting off on this whole thing of getting rid of her.
Yeah.
We have to put ourselves in a psychological... Sometimes maybe that's why people drink when they write. Or like, I can't do this if I don't have this drink.
Right.
But it is hard to do that.
With Survivor being based on a true story, and it's based on a 16-year-old girl who, it's actually the end when her boyfriend, the guy that she's been in love with I actually think she was 19 at the end, but he gets progressively more physically violent, but he's been mentally torturing her for years. And she doesn't believe that she's worth anything, that she even deserves to live unless he says so.
Yeah.
Well, that's my story.
Yeah.
And I have the physical scars to prove it. And when I did the launch, I avoided doing a reading as long as humanly possible until one of the people there took the microphone and announced I was going to do a reading. And I still have to find him and thank him for that.
Yeah.
But I broke down. I cried. And my mom, who was there, she flew in for the launch. She had to actually announce to everybody that it was my story. And it had a very positive effect once I got over that. But I was seeing my therapist 3 times a week. I was on antidepressants the entire time I wrote the story, because it was the first time I faced all of that since I was a teenager. But it was extremely therapeutic.
Now, was the story written as fiction or as memoir?
It's a dramatization, and I did change some of the aspects of it just because I'm 35 years old and I'm still dealing with it. Whereas in the book, there's more of a conclusion to it. But most of the elements are actually completely real. They're just change location, change the names. And
the reason I ask that is because that's interesting. If it's written as a fictional story and someone's reading it across the world somewhere, as Jan said, they'll have no idea the emotions that went into that book and the person behind that story. They probably just think it's something you made up on a whim.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. We do shows all the time with authors who often write about what they know. We'll be doing an interview later on today, actually, with someone from Australia who's writing about murder. Well, the reason he knows so much about murder is he was a detective in a police department in Australia. So, you know, he's got like 13 novels out now, but he's writing about aspects of what he knows. Obviously, they're made-up novels. They're all created. The characters are created. But they're based on actual events that he had to investigate. So we do write about what we know oftentimes. sometimes. And then we've had Morgan St. James on. Morgan St. James talks about how some of her books, like, well, I forgot the one about being a cougar, you know, she writes about real life. You know, they're fictional stories, but she certainly knows what she's writing about.
Yep.
You know?
Yes.
So, you know, we do tend to always incorporate elements of what we know into our stories.
I think there's a piece of us in everything that we write, and all of our characters, whether we intend to do it or not.
Right, and that's the thing, too. We may not always intend. We may write it and then read it and go, oh, wait a minute, I kind of know that, or I did this, or, you know. So that's true.
Right.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it's also a nice revenge opportunity if there are people in your life who, you know, you'll be in my next book.
Ah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. All right, I'm going to read this next one, which is Philip K. Dick was a genius and one of the greatest science fiction writers in history. He also was a man who saw visions his whole life. He was frequently paranoid and was probably an underdiagnosed schizophrenic. This all culminated in what Dick came to refer to as 2/3/74 February, and that's March of 1974. That day he was under, I guess, anesthesia for the dental surgery, and he saw streams of visions and was transported back into early Christian days of ancient Rome after he came out of that. So maybe he was seeing something from the past. Who knows? He began working on exegesis, compiling nearly 10,000 pages of handwritten notes before he died in 1982. And Judy, thank you for helping me say that word.
You're welcome.
So it's interesting how I guess you could say in a way, when you're kind of in a transit state or you know, a trance.
You get the ego out of the way. You get all the internal filters and the voices that have given you directions that are not right and not good. You get all that crap out of the way, and then you can let it go. Just let it flow.
But it's interesting how it kind of like it jarred something in his mind that put him into a state he'd never been in before, obviously.
Right.
Go ahead, Jen.
No, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is what is interesting about this is anyone who's out there that believes in reincarnation, perhaps he was seeing something from the past. You know, I mean, if you want to speculate.
So dental surgery is the key to past lives?
Well, I'm just saying in his case, I don't recommend getting a surgery so you can remember your past life, but no.
I'd give my eye teeth for that. No, I'm kidding. I think that, there is a woman who is a profound psychic that worked with my sister's police department. My sister was a deputy sheriff, and this woman helped them to find murdered children and all this other business. She came up here to Boston to get an MRI, and she said, don't use the dye. And they used the dye, and her psychic abilities were gone.
Really?
For like 2 years. And she wrote a book called Judith, because that was her name, Judith. She actually lost her psychic abilities for 2 years. She sued and got $1 million.
Oh my goodness!
So whether that gives credence to psychic ability or not, but she was really good.
Yeah.
I mean, she would tell you what the perps looked like, where they came from, where the babies were buried. Incredible.
Wow.
So maybe it does take it away or put it in. I don't know.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this is a good lead-in for my next book coming up, which I am proud to talk about because it is coming out here in May of 2018.
Cool.
And in fact, we're going to be doing a book launching party. I'd like to mention that now. Anyone who lives in Henderson or Las Vegas area, we're going to be doing the first annual Aspects of Writing book launching party. It's going to be like a picnic, really. And everyone's invited. We'll get more information out as we get closer to that date. And I know Judy and Renee will be there, and Jan and myself. But my book is called The Alien Transcripts, and it basically deals with a species that came and created us, the life images that we are today on Earth. But it goes into how, we were all, in a sense, reincarnated. The soul's reincarnated and comes back. And in their world, they were able to remember their past. Because we were a crossbreed of the primates of Earth, our brain isn't able to decipher that. We're just reaching a point in our evolution to where we're just now starting to be able to recall those past lives. So when I read that was really interesting how when he came out from being under anesthetic, he can remember, something, or at least, project himself back to, the ancient Rome times in Christianity. So, that's my new book, The Alien Transcripts.
Well, I know you talk about so much of your writing comes from dreams.
Yes.
I believe that.
And everybody dreams. We need to start piecing them together, people.
Well, there's times, I know there was one time I think I called Jan 3 times in 1 week. I had 3 different dreams that week, literally created 3 stories that 1 week.
Wow.
That's the only problem I have as a writer, because you want to focus on what you're working on, and so you want to get that complete. And what happens with me is oftentimes when I go to sleep at night, not all the time, but quite often, I will dream something. And sometimes it's so relevant in my mind that I want to get up and write it down. So I'll get up in the morning and I'll write that. And I'll have the entire outline for a story from that dream. And I even though I can't get to them all, I still write them down. I'm not kidding you. Right now I probably have over 100 or more ideas just from dreams.
That's wonderful. Go with it.
Yeah. So I think we need to make sure. That's what's interesting too as authors, because a lot of times people say, I never dream anything like that. Where our stories come from is interesting, because some people write based on just strictly from what they know. Mm-hmm. A lot of us let our characters guide us. I'm one of those.
Me too.
And then there are other authors. I think Grisham doesn't believe that the character guides you. He guides the characters.
No.
So, we're all different when it comes to writing as well. You can't to say, well, what does it take to be an author? There is no criteria for being an author. It's whatever inspires you or motivates you to go out there and write something.
And don't think that you need certain criteria to be able to start. You don't need a degree in English. You don't need a degree in journalism. You don't need any degrees. If you have that urgency to get a message out, put it out, and then if it doesn't sound good to you, take some English classes or read some books to doctor it up, to fix the wording or tighten it up, whatever. But don't wait for the mechanics of writing to stop the flow of ideas to writing.
Right. And that's what a good editor is for, too.
And you can't let your background stop you either. Because I remember seeing an interview not too long ago with Tyler Perry, and he was talking about how the first time he met Oprah Winfrey. Did you see that?
No, but I think he's crazy.
But what he did is he was working at a hotel, I believe it was in New Orleans, and he was working. I don't remember what exactly he did. He did something on the floors. He worked in either with the maids department doing something like a floor person or whatever. And he knew she was going to be there, and he wanted to meet her, and he was real nervous about it, and he figured out a way to meet her, and he did get to meet her, and they spoke for the first time, and I think he said that, I don't remember if Oprah remembered that incident or not, but of course he did. But think about where he was. He was just a young kid, struggling to make it, working in this little department. Yeah. And look where he is today.
Yeah.
He just bought an Air Force base, by the way, that's turning it into a studio.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and he already has a studio in Atlanta, Georgia.
I want to meet Medea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't let obstacles get in your way. It does not matter what your background is, what your educational background is, no matter abuse, if that was a situation. You can't let things stop you from being creative. We do. We all have a tendency to incorporate past life into what we're trying to accomplish, and all it's doing is just stifling you. You need to get beyond that, move forward, and go on with your life. There's a life out there. Just look for it.
I think you have to be careful not to let insecurities, because that voice that's in your head that might take over your characters can be strong too. The one that says, it's not going to be good enough, no one's going to like it, nobody's going to like you, whatever the case may be. I had that for 8 years before my first novel recently in 2014 came out.
Yeah.
And I stared at it for years and just went, nobody's going to care about this. And then and I was so afraid maybe that if I did finally finish it, nothing else would ever inspire me, and I'd never have anything else to say. What if, not only what if it wasn't good enough, what if it was, and then I never had another book in me.
Right.
And then I was driving back from the Grand Canyon, and my boyfriend took a nap, and all of a sudden a character was so strong, popped into my head and gave me an entire outline of her book. And I got home and spent 3 hours in the office, and my boyfriend's like, I'm just going to go for a ride out on the motorcycle, I think.
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening in there. But once the floodgates opened, it was there. And I finally learned to take the editor and dingle something, shiny in front of it and go throw it in the corner of my brain for a little while so that the characters can talk. And then, like you said, that's what a regular editor is for. you can fix it later. Let me tell my story.
Yeah, get it
Right.
on paper. That's the most
Yes.
important thing.
Yeah. As an author, it's okay to be a serial killer. It really is.
That's the part I had the biggest trouble with, was
Yeah.
writing my bad guy.
Yeah.
To me, he's very cardboard. He doesn't have a lot of depth. As I look at it now and I read now, I think, oh, what a nasty guy. But he could have had so much more depth.
Well,
But
that was
Yeah.
the hard part for me, Judy.
Yeah, I couldn't get my head into the badness of him.
How I did it is I sat there and I wrote this book, and I thought, he is a really, really bad guy. What would a really bad person do? And I cried for 2 days. I'm going to admit this. I literally thought, if you write this, people are going to think, and some people questioned me, are you nuts? Where did this come from? How could you have created this?
Yeah.
But you have to do that. You have to let the character become real. In your mind, you have to think, what would this person do? And we see enough television, we read enough books that it's kind of easy to even, get guidance from that. And it's just,
Right.
That's the problem. I don't watch a lot of TV, almost none. And I don't.
But you read.
I read. But one of my male friends read my book, and he said, I wanted to exact revenge on that guy.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
said, really? I mean,
Yeah.
I think the guy's awful. But then I started watching some of these locked up shows, where people are in prison, the men.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my God, they really are bad. Look at that. Those things I would never have thought of. In the next book, he'll be worse.
Yeah.
Aha.
But that's what you do. And you don't worry about, you can't worry about how someone's going to look at you afterwards, because you're not a writer if you do that.
Right.
You have to let your imagination go. If you really want to accomplish something with that.
Starting to wonder what it says about me that I actually enjoy writing the bad guys more. I see. It's not that I necessarily connect with them more, but I think because in my life, even though being a table games dealer isn't a traditional job, I don't get to really go out and be wild necessarily. So I let my characters do all sorts of fun, crazy stuff.
Yeah, same here.
Well, you have to be uninhibited as a writer. It's kind of like someone who writes music. No, Taylor Swift comes to mind. You know what? She doesn't care what people think.
I love her.
Yeah, well, because she always writes about past romances or
yeah.
feuds with, like, Katy Perry. But the point is that she's uninhibited when it comes to her writing. It's like, this is going to make a great song.
Right.
I'm going to write it. And that's fine. That's great.
I think she's on every playlist I have.
Now, obviously, hers is from real life. We're not talking about real life when it comes to the bad guys. We're creating those in our minds. But there are always people out there that you can always look at and say, well, wonder what that person would do or what they would have done, or And like you said, if you're watching the movies about people who were in prison, they tell stories all the time how they got there and what they did.
It's a whole series, and you watch some of the inmates as they go through their traumas in there and their frustration and their head banging and all that. And those are things I would never know about,
Yeah.
My son is a corrections officer in a prison, and I said, I think I'll go volunteer. He said, no, you're not. I said, why? He said, you are so naive, you would get everybody killed. No.
Oh, wow. Well, so there is no criteria for becoming an author. It doesn't matter the age, race, creed, or color.
Right.
The written word is in all of us, and it really is. The trick is finding a way to get it out and on paper, and that's the hardest part. Would anyone like to add anything before we go into the last few minutes of the show?
I think sometimes the hardest thing, you were talking about your friend that had the PhD but just could not write a book. Sometimes you have that story inside you, but you know what? Writing might not be your forte.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be afraid to tell somebody else. Don't be afraid to partner up. I've done ghostwriting for a couple of people who've done like the writing for their families. They could not string two sentences together if you paid them to do it,
Right.
but they have some really phenomenal stories. So when they tell me, I can put it down in a writing aspect for them.
Yeah.
And it's been like Christmas gifts and stuff like that. So
That's a good point.
don't
Very
be
good point.
Don't be
Yeah.
afraid if
Yeah.
you have that story, but writing might not be your thing.
Mhm.
Don't be afraid to talk to somebody who it is their thing. Let them help you.
And always remember, you're not writing the Bible. It
Right.
can always be edited.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is important to understand. Well, first of all, we always talk about how, there's like 1,000 authors a day now that are published. But don't let that discourage you either. Like I said, I truly write for the enjoyment of it. I don't write for anyone at this table. I don't write for anyone out there. Obviously, once I finished a book, I hope that it is successful, but I don't I don't bank on it. I'm just going to go out there and do the best I can do and see what happens. I'm very fortunate with my first book that it took me on a journey that led me back here, because I didn't live in Las Vegas when I finished that book. I actually lived in Atlanta, Georgia. And then I actually took that book to California for some signings and decided to stay in Las Vegas. So I ended up back here in Las Vegas. It's led to this radio show, and boy, have I met so many nice people over the years just on the radio show.
Oh yeah, it's incredible.
So let your writing take you where it will. Don't think about the money or the financial aspect of it. And today when you write and you publish, you don't really need to think about, am I going to lose my shirt when I publish this? My first book cost me a fortune, because back then when I came out with that book in 1995. Publishing wasn't the same as it is today. We didn't have CreateSpace or Smashwords or any of these places to go to like Lightning Source, where you could just put your book there, and if it sells, it sells. You don't put a penny out. Back then, you had to buy the books. You had to buy in quantity, 2,000, 5,000, and stack them in your garage. And, it cost you thousands of dollars literally to publish a book. Today, it wouldn't cost you a penny if you didn't want it to, unless you're paying for a good editor, which is the only thing I highly recommend.
Yeah.
You can create your covers. So don't think about, what's it going to cost me. If you do all that and you're just printing it for the joy, then that's great. That's what you want to do. If it's a success afterwards, fantastic. So you're all the better for it.
Yeah. And just what you said, because when I wrote my book, my whole thing was to answer a woman who was running for Congress that I disagreed with. I had no idea it would lead me to have now friends in Australia, New Zealand, England, Canada, Mexico, South America. I had no idea I'd ever meet these people, and now I know hundreds of people that I would have never have known before.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, we're down to the last minute of the show, and I would like to thank our guests, Renee Jean and Judy Shine Logan, and then Jan for being on the show with us as well today. And Judy, where can we learn more about your work?
My website is in progress. It's judyshinelogan.com.
Okay. And Renee?
Writingforces.com, also being revamped.
Okay. And Jan?
JanetCorsey.com. I'm not being revamped.
I'm
as vampy as I get.
This show broadcasts live on AM FM 24/7 on every Saturday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. We also rebroadcast on Blog Talk Radio on Sundays at 9 o'clock p.m. Pacific Standard Time. All links to this show can be found on the aspectsofwriting.com website. There you also find links to our syndicated show on iHeartRadio, iTunes, Roku TV, Livestream, and a lot more. And, of course, on amfm247.com, they archive our show as well. In addition, we archive the shows on the aspectsofwriting.com website. Yes. You can find the video of the past shows, the video portion of our past shows, on YouTube at youtube.com/aspectsofwriting. And Aspects of Writing is all one word. Or you can go to our website at aspectsofwriting.com.
Yeah.
So until next week.
YouTube there.
Yeah. So until next week, this is your host reminding you, if you can dream it, you can write it. Thank you, everyone, for being on the show.
Thank you, James. Thank you.